What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to be learning how I made this cool text effect in After Effects once and then use the essential graphics panel to make it as many times as I want in all of my video projects. We're going to learn some fractal noise, we're going to learn some displacement maps, we're going to learn some text effects using some expressions, and a couple other things. I hope this is useful. Let's go right into After Effects and learn some things. Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. We are now in After Effects. So, very first thing before we touch anything in Premiere is we need to make the motion graphics template. So to start, we'll make a folder. This is how I like to start my projects. Compositions. Just hit enter, and then we will click on the create new composition button down here, the little film wheel. We'll call this the main comp. We'll set this to 1920 by 1080. Most of the time, your Premiere templates or sequence settings will be 30 frames, 24 frames, whatever else. So make sure that if you're going to use this in Premiere as a motion graphics template, this either matches or the frame rate is above what you plan on exporting as. So I'm going to set this to 1920 by 1080, which is HD. Set this animation for 10 seconds because it doesn't need to last any longer than that. Click OK. Alright, so first things first, we'll need some text on the screen. We're going to click and drag across the screen, and we'll type enter one line of text. Hit enter. Let's resize this so that this box only fits the one line of text just for this purpose. When we get to other more advanced tutorials, we'll change this setting, but right now we'll just stick with one line, and we'll set it to all caps for when we do the sizing of the stroke and text box. You'll hit Control, Alt, and Home on the keyboard to center the little anchor point, and then Control Home Command if you're on a Mac, and that will center the text on the screen. That looks good. What we'll do from here is we'll right click on our text layer. We will go to Pre-Compose. We will call this text composition. Hit OK. First things first, this seems a little weird, but we're going to change the text composition to 4K. So we'll hit Control K on the keyboard, or for those of you who would rather use a mouse, we will click on composition settings, and change this to 3840, because 1920 by 1080 times 2 is 3840 by 2160. So do some math or just memorize those. Click OK. So we have our one line of text. What we're going to do now is we're going to double click on the rectangle tool at the top with no other layer selected, and that will create a shape layer. We'll go into the contents of that shape layer. We'll go to the rectangle path, Alt click on the stopwatch under the size parameter, and that will open up your expression tab. First things first, we need to set some variables. These variables are data points, so to speak, that the layer is going to refer to when it's looking for information. So we're going to use this little pick whip down here and tie it to our main text. Then at the very beginning of this little expression that I created, we'll type C equals that. So what I'm saying is C is always going to equal this layer of text. We'll end that with a semicolon and hit enter. Next, we'll type X equals C. We're referring back to that text layer, what we just defined as C. Dot source rect, capital case sensitive is important, rect at time, open and close parentheses, width. So the X is going to be the width of the size of this layer. Close that. Forgive me, we do need a little period there. Then the Y is going to be basically the same thing, equals C dot source rect at time, open and close, dot height, close that statement with a semicolon, enter, enter, just so that we know where we're working. We're going to define what the value of the size will be. So that will be x, comma, y. Close brackets and hit. Oh, I did make a slight boo-boo and capitalize an extra T. Remember, case sensitive. There we go. So now what we'll see here is that the shape layer is covering the text. Let's just turn that to pure white. Just for fun, we'll go into the shape layer settings by either going down to these drop down menus, and we can turn off the fill by turning the opacity down, or we can go into the fill settings at the very top and click on the cross out. We'll set the stroke to say, I don't know, 10. And then what we'll see is that the text is surrounded by this box. Great, so it's kind of cutting everything off though. So what we're gonna do is add another small thing to our expression. But first, we need to make something called a null object. And a null object is something that will reference data in an expression or an animation or anything in After Effects. So to do that, we'll go to layer, we'll go to new and click on null object. I normally use keybind, so I highly recommend memorizing this. You'll hit Control-Alt-Shift-Y. So you could go to that drop-down menu under layer or Control-Alt-Shift-Y on the keyboard. That will create a new null object. Let's just center this back up so we have our text there. I'm gonna name this null object text controller, just so that we know what's controlling things. We'll go to the effect controls of our text controller, click on where are my effects and presets. Down here, I have it already loaded, but you would type in slider and it'll be under expression controls. We'll drag that on and we'll rename this slider control padding. Next, we'll go back into our shape layer by hitting UU, and that will reveal all of our expressions and our animation keyframes on our layer. So we're gonna add another parameter. We'll call this P for padding equals. Then we'll use that little pick whip down. Oh, one thing I forgot. We will need to go to the padding text controller, lock this panel, just so we can see it. We'll go back to the P and then pick whip that to the slider that we just made. Close that with a semicolon. Then we'll scroll down to the very bottom of the expression, hit plus, open bracket, left bracket, P, comma, P, close bracket, and close semicolon. So now what will happen is if we use the slider control and we increase it, oh my god, that's so cool. The padding is growing. So we can have a little text box. We will then add another slider control and we will call this the stroke width. And we will go into the shape layer controls, collapse that down. Now we have the stroke width. Alt click on the stopwatch and we'll refer back to the slider that we just made. And now it's set to 0. Oh, it's not there, but we'll set that to 10 and we're good to go. Normally you don't want to have it maybe bigger than say 100, but we'll just keep it there knowing that it shouldn't go below 0 because it's not going to be anything, or we'll keep it at 10 just to keep something pretty uniform. Okay, now we'll add one more. Clicking on our stroke width, we'll duplicate that. We'll call this opacity of BG background, and that will be the fill of the shape layer. So we'll collapse down the stroke and we'll alt click the opacity of the fill and we'll refer back to the opacity of background slider. Then we'll go back up to the shape layer settings and click on the fill and click on solid color. So now what we see is that if we set this slider all the way up to 100, it kind of comes the text. Or if we set it to say just 10%, it'll create a little bit of a background. Now we have something to have it stand out. The only problem is it is set to white, so we'll need to add another thing to this text controller. We'll go to expression controls and color control, and we'll then set the color of the fill by alt-clicking on the stopwatch once again, and then refer back to the color control, and now it is set to red. Don't want it set to red, let's just click on this neutral gray. Surprisingly, the After Effects gray is really nice on text, so we'll just set that, and if we want that to go up, there we go, it's up to 100. If you want to get fancy and make it so that this clamp only stays within a certain parameter, clamp slider, then you'll go to the opacity of BG controls. If we want to set that to limit between 0 and 100, we'll alt-click on the stopwatch, we will click on the pick whip to refer back to that, and now we'll, at the very beginning of the expression, type clamp, parentheses, refer back to the first piece of information, which is the slider that we're controlling. 0 is going to be the minimum value, then comma 100 will be the maximum value. So now we'll see that if we change anything below 100, it's not going any lower. If we change anything over 100, it won't go any higher. So 0 is the minimum, 100 is the maximum. So that's good to know. Cool little expression that you can use in the future. All right, so we have our text controller. Oh, I guess we could do one more thing. We could change this to color control of BG, then duplicate that, and then we'll color control of text. Then we'll go into the text controls, text, then animate, then go to fill color and set that to RGB. Then we can alt-click on the fill color and refer that to color control of text. Uh-oh, it is dark gray. We'll set that to white. Move that up just because I think that's a little bit more important than anything else. And I suppose we could also set the color of the stroke. So we'll do that by going into the stroke settings, duplicate the control of BG once again, color control of stroke. Then we will go into the stroke controls, that's the fill, the stroke, alt click on the color and refer to the color of the stroke. Set that to white because that looks pretty. Color stroke, padding, there we go. So we're changing the color of the stroke, color of the background, color of the text, the stroke width, the background width, which is controlled by the padding. All those things are going to control this text layer. Text layer is done. We're pretty far into this video. It's going to be a long video. Bear with me. It'll all be worth it. So we just changed a bunch of things. Moving back into the main composition, we have our giant one line of text. Next, we're going to need to make our texture for the glitch effect. So we're going to hit Control Y on the keyboard, or what you could do is go to Layer, New, and Solid. I prefer using keybinds, Control Y to make a solid. Make sure this is also set at 4K because we'll need it for some other effects in the future. Before clicking OK, let's name this Fractal Texture. Then we'll go into Effects and Presets, type Fractal Noise. What this is going to do is create pretty clouds, but we can change this to block. I'm just going to create some block textures. We're going to turn the complexity down to 2. Then we're going to do a couple animation and texture changes. So first we're going to go into the transform properties of the fractal noise. We'll go to the uniform scale, uncheck that, set the width a little more wide, let's say 300, and then the height, let's say 70, 60. That looks cool. We'll go to the offset turbulence, I guess you don't need to all click that. You will regularly click on the offset turbulence and we'll animate this. So at the very beginning we have our first keyframe. At the very end of our composition we'll multiply that by 2, so 1920 by 2. Use the little star to multiply within the text box. We'll do some addition and subtraction. Hit enter, and you'll notice now we have this animation of it moving across the screen. Cool. Next, we'll need to do the evolution. So we could either animate this by doing the same thing with the offset turbulence, setting it to a different value so it's revolving evolution over the animation, or we can just use another simple expression that I like to use, time, which is going to reference the time in which the composition plays, star, let's say 100. So now it's going to take 1 second times 100, 2 seconds times 100, and just continue doing that. So now we get this animation of it moving across the screen. Great. Okay, next, what we're going to do is we're going to need to do a couple changes to this before we can have it affect the text column. So first thing, we're going to go to the contrast, set that to say 200, so it's a little bit more monochromatic. We'll go to the brightness control and we will animate that by clicking on the stopwatch and then hit negative, say 150 to start, until it's completely black. So a little bit more, negative 160 is great. Then we'll hit U on the keyboard to reveal just our keyframes. We'll notice that we have the brightness keyframe there. We'll go say 20 frames, so hit shift and page down on your keyboard twice, and that will move forward about 20 frames. Shift will move it 10 frames. If you just hit page down normally, you'll hit it 1 frame. We'll set that to say 0. And now we have everything back in. Then we'll go 20 frames forward and set that to say 160 again. And let's see how that looks. So it's animating on, animating out. Select all those keyframes, hit F9, Control C, and then Control V at the very end. So now we have it going in and out, but the problem is we just copied the exact same thing. So we'll right click on the end keyframes, go to keyframe assistant, and then time reverse keyframe. So now it will animate in and then animate out. Great. What we'll do now is right click on the fractal texture, click on pre-compose, we'll call this fractal texture, click on move all attributes into new composition, click OK. So now in the texture composition we have all the effects. We go here and it's just a blank composition, no effects. We have the text, no effects. The only problem is we don't see any text. Uncheck the little eye next to the fractal texture and there's our text back. Great. So to set the texture onto our text composition, we're going to need to apply a couple effects. First, we'll go to our effects and presets and type displacement map. Put that on the effects and controls of the text composition. We'll set that to 0. The vertical displacement, that is. We'll set this to say, I don't know, 100 to start. And we'll set that to the fractal texture. So what's happening is it's going to be moving based on what it sees on the fractal texture. So we'll see here that there's the glitch effect, and we'll see it's based on our texture here. What we can do to give this a little bit more life is duplicate this 3 times, or twice. We'll have 3 copies. I'm going to set the second one to negative 250 and the third one to 250. Make sure that these are equal so that it stays mostly center in the composition, but there's just one problem. We have the text moving, so we're going to need to add another effect called set matte, 2 T's. Put that above everything, and we'll set that to luminance, which is going to look at the black and white, and then set that to fractal texture. So now what's happening is it's going to look at the black and white, but there's one more thing we have to do. We'll go into our X position of the text composition, right click on it. We'll see that I already separated the dimensions, but if we uncheck that, we'll see that it's just the position X and Y, and we'll click separate dimensions. We'll alt click on X, and we'll type 960, which is the original position, plus whatever the max horizontal displacement is of the first displacement map, and then hit enter, and that should center it. So now if we look at what's happening, it's gonna move the 4K composition around based on the position of the original X. It's a little complicated. Just do it a couple times if it doesn't make sense, but we're basically taking this number and adding it to the center so it always stays a constant number. So if it is technically negative, it's 960 plus negative 116, so it's moving it back into the center of the screen, and vice versa if it's addition. So that's cool. So what this does is if we set that to 0 and we go to the very beginning, it'll just glitch on the composition like so. Or if we move it to the left, let's say to negative 300, then at the beginning of the composition, it'll sort of come in from the left. So that's actually pretty cool. We can control the direction of the displacement map or of the animation based on this first displacement map. So I'm just gonna set that back to 0 for now. That's pretty much done with regards to the nitty-gritty effects parts of everything. So now is where we start to do the Adobe Premiere transfer using the motion graphics template. So first, to do that, we're going to need to create another null object to reference data like we talked about earlier. We'll go to Layer, New, Null Object. We'll call this Animation Controls 1L. We'll add a slider from the effects and presets, and we'll drag that onto, and the first thing that we're going to do is we'll call this animation direction, and we'll go into the first, actually click on the little lock on the effect controls of the animation controls, and we'll go to the text composition. We'll go to effects displacement map 1. We'll alt click on the max horizontal displacement, and we'll drag that over to the slider. So now this slider controls the direction of the animation. So if we go negative, it'll come from the left. If we go positive, a little too much, let's say 300, it'll come from the right. Alright, so that's pretty cool. Let's set that back to 0. What else would we want to change? The cool part about the Essential Graphics panel is it gives us a lot of tools to make sure we customize as many properties as we need to in Premiere. So we're going to go to Window and click on Essential Graphics, and it'll open up. We'll select the main composition, so main comp, and we'll set the poster time. That's kind of like the thumbnail, so to speak. We'll set that to right there just so we know what we're looking at. And then we'll click on the text composition, and we'll go to Solo Supported Properties. And it'll open up every single property that we can add to this composition. So the first one we'll add is the animation direction. We'll go to the animation controls, click on that slider, drag it in, we'll name it animation direction. And then next we'll collapse everything because there is one slight problem. We need to add the position and the scale of the effect. So let's say we wanted to change the position of the animation, we would need to change X and Y, but it doesn't give us a direct slider for X and Y. it has to have separated dimensions. So we'll go to that. And we'll notice that this number is locked based on this expression that we made earlier. So what we need to do is open up the slider controls once again and set this to X position. And we'll need to change this 960 to the slider. Uh-oh, guess what? It's on the 0 spot, so just change that to 960, and we're good to go. To make this a little bit cleaner, we'll alt-click on the slider. We'll type clamp. We'll set it to reference that slider, then set it to 0, 1920, because that's the size of our composition. Set that to enter, and it'll make sure it stays within the 0 to 1920. Cool, so set that to 960 once again. Duplicate that. Y position, let's just make it uniform. You could just add the X and Y position, but we'll use the sliders just so that we know where everything is. So we'll set the Y position to reference this slider. Then let's open up our animation controls, hit EE to open up the controls, set that to Y, that's a 7, Y. Then set this to the maximum Y value, which will be 1080. Cool, so this will be 540 because that's half of 1080. So now we have the X position, which we can change. We have the Y position that we can change, that's cool. And then we can add these directly into the animation controls of the essential graphics. Let's rename that X slider just so we know what we're doing. We'll move that in. This is the Y slider. Actually, you know what? Let's change this to Y position just to keep it cool. Make sure we know what we're doing. We'll edit the range on this so that we know the limitations when we're in Premiere. So click on the edit range. We'll set the slide range from 0 to 1920 for the X value and set the default to 960. We'll go to the Y position, edit range 0 to 1080 and set the default to 540. Hit OK. The animation direction, the slider range is going to be negative, say 500 to 500. 1,000 pixels to the left and right. That should be fine. If you need more, you can always change that, but the more you do, it ends up coming in super fast. I would recommend keeping it 500. So we have that. Next, let's go into the text composition. We'll add the scale in there. Oh, sometimes you can't add things, so we can just simply duplicate another slider. Size of text. And then we'll alt-click on the scale of the text composition, and we'll set that to that slider. Oh my goodness, it's so big. Let's set that to 100. Oh, I made a boo-boo. Set that to 100. Because of expressions, we're good. Then if we need to bring it up or bring it down, oh my goodness, let's add a clamp to that clamp. Refer back to that slider, then set the minimum value to 0, then the maximum value to say 500. Sure, 500 sounds good. If we go any, so I doubt anyone's gonna be making text that big. But hey, if you need to, it's there. Next, the most important thing, we'll need to add the text. Oh, forgot to add that. Size, so let's just add that. So change that to size of text. And set the default value to 100. Okay, most important thing, I'm sure, why you're here is the text of the animation that we're doing. So we're going into text composition. We'll go into the source text of the text layer. So this is the most important thing. We'll drag that on to the very top and type source text, and we'll set it to say enter text here. And then we can do something called add a comment, where we can say a parameter or something we want the user to know whenever they're changing this. So say enter one line grammar, one line of text. Then we'll click and drag that. There you go. So now what's cool is we can change this, and that will obviously transfer into Premiere, but we can change this to John, Jags, me. Just hypothetically, there's that. Enter text here. There you go. Alright, now remember how we did add a couple other things earlier? We'll uncheck the effect controls lock, so we can go to the text controller. We have a couple other parameters we can change. So let's type U, or we'll type E to see any expression, and then this is the first one, so we can add all of these. Background opacity, and add a comment. 0 is off and 100 is on. And then let's go to E. Reveals all of our effects that we have. So we have the color of text. So text color. We have the padding. So that'll be for our stroke and our background for the text. So, and we'll edit the range on that to say 0 to 1920, sure. So if we ever need to bring it super big, we could. I doubt you would ever need to do that, but it's there. Then what you could do is add the stroke color. And I guess for uniformity, we could drag this above the padding, or maybe we'll keep it below. Then we'll add the stroke width, and then we'll add the color of the background. Now let's edit the range on the stroke width, because I doubt you're going to need to go all the way up to 100. You know, I guess you could. There might be a use for that somewhere. So let's just set that to maybe 150. So just in case someone's, well, I'm just going to set the default to 10, and then set the padding to 100. So that looks pretty cool. We have our basic text. We have it animating on if we go back to the main composition. And we can change a lot of things. If we go into the essential graphics, we can change the direction, so it'll come from the left to the right. We can change the where it is, the X position, the Y position, the size. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna drag these under the text, because these are a little bit more important. I highly recommend setting these X, Y, and size parameters over everything else, because everything else below is more or less animation, depending on where you actually need this to show up on your compositions. Those are more important parameters. So definitely put the most important things at the top. Let's set the X position back to 960, Y position back to 540, and then I'm gonna say that we're done here. There's a lot you can do with the Essential Graphics panel. This is one way I used it in Adobe After Effects. The very final thing that we'll do is we'll transfer this into our Adobe Premiere. So, very last thing, we'll name it. So, Glitch Text. animation template. We'll click on export motion graphics template. Make sure that you save your project. It'll ask you just in case things crash or die or whatever else. It'll save everything. It'll ask where you want to save it. Essential graphics. You can click on warn me if this motion graphic template uses fonts that are not available. So make sure you choose a font that you have available on all of your machines, or if you're sending this to clients or friends, make sure you send the font that you wanted to use with them or whatever else. Or if you need additional plugins, then it will say warn me if After Effects needs to be installed in order to customize this motion graphic template. Click OK. Verifying. This font that I'm using is one that I use on my computer, but if you can use any other font, I highly recommend it. This is just the font I used. Click OK. And then if we go over to Adobe Premiere. Coming into Premiere, we can see that I'm already working on this tutorial a little bit already, but let's get to the tutorial sequence where I will drag some random footage I have on my timeline. Just some jellyfish from the Long Beach Aquarium, nothing special, but we're using this as a demonstration of the Essential Graphics panel in Premiere. So to first find the panel, we'll go to Window at the very top, then click on Essential Graphics if you don't have it checked. If it's checked, it's probably somewhere on your workspace. If you don't see it, check the docked areas. Mine is docked in the upper left-hand corner. I will click and clearly see that Adobe has a lot, and there's some of mine here as well. And I could just search for the one I want. So glitch, and voila. The one that I made a couple weeks ago, which I'll explain in a moment, is here. And we'll see that I have my text on the screen, and if I go to the very beginning, it does the little glitchy distortion animation. My computer is a little slow, bear with me on that, but it does animate in and then animate out. But the most important thing is, can we change the text? Well, click on the little edit button, then we'll have to make sure we have our Mogert motion graphics template selected. Under the source text, which I created in After Effects, we'll type jellyfish or whatever you want. And voila, it changes that. We can move it to the left and right. We can move it up and down. We can change the text color if we want. If you scroll down, you'll see all these changes that we added to our motion graphics template are here. And obviously you can change a lot of things inside the Essential Graphics panel to suit whatever your needs are. If you need to make templates for a client or yourself or your vlogs, whatever, you just make it once, spend 4 hours figuring something out, making a style, and you're done. It's just that simple. I highly encourage the Essential Graphics panel just mastering that, because it'll just save so much time in the future. But that's it. We learned a lot today. We learned the source rect time expression and how it will influence a text box based on the size of a text layer. We learned how to make a texture with some fractal noise, and then use a displacement map and a set mat to create a digital transition sort of thing over some text. You can obviously do that on a lot of things. And we learned how to use the Essential Graphics panel, and there's a lot more uses for it. Please try and figure it out. I hope this was helpful in figuring it out, because it will just save you so much time in whatever videos you need to make. I hope this was helpful once again. Thank you so much for watching. If you have questions or concerns or comments, put it in the comment section down below. Until next time, my name is Jagsywagsy. Thank you so much. Hit that like button, and I will see you in that next video or tutorial or whatever. It'll be fun, I promise. Bye bye.